So I'm Brad Levitt, and welcome to the AFT Construction Podcast today. And we're very fortunate to bring on Steve Baczek. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, Brad, how you doing? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you on for a few reasons. You know, you and I have crossed paths over the last year and a half or so, and I've been a big fan of yours through social media, and I know a lot of other builders that just speak so highly of you, and you've been such a proponent of, you know, building technology and green and sustainable and net zero and all this, you know, everything that we're trying to achieve as a builder. And that's the biggest reason I want to bring you on, is just to share that expertise with us.
Awesome. I'm here and willing, so it's not
So
a problem. And I had a great teacher. You know, we both have a mutual friend that we look up to, Joe Steve Baczek.
uh-huh.
And you know, I learned very early on. Joe's heart was in sharing knowledge, and you know, I try and foster that as best I can to take. I mean, this knowledge that I have is, yes, it's mine, but I got it from a whole bunch of people, just like Joe got his from a whole bunch of people that got it from a bunch of people. And, you know, we're just sending it down the line. So trying to do my best at it.
So before we dive into this, you know, explain to our listeners, you know, Joe had a little tutorial there in Vegas when you and I were there, but, you know, how did that relation start with Joe?
So Joe, I had graduated architecture school, got out of architecture. I was probably about a year out of it. And Joe went to the college that I went to give a talk. And the department head of the architecture department was in the back of the room hanging out with Betsy while Joe was giving a lecture to the school. And Betsy had talked about how they had just gotten the Building America contract, that they're looking for an employee, someone that can help them out. And I was really good friends with the department head. And, you know, I because I went in the Marine Corps, I was 4 years kind of displaced from all the other architecture students. So I was a little older. I won't say any more mature, but certainly older. And he said, you know what? I think I have just the right guy for you. And so he called me that evening and said, hey, you know, Betsy Pettit's going to be calling you to set up a time to come out and meet. And literally, this was like a Thursday night, and Saturday afternoon, I'm down in Brookline sitting in their living room talking about, you know, do I want to come work for Building Science Corporation? And they hired me, and, you know, I was there for almost 10 years, started in their basement in Brookline.
That's incredible. And for those listening that don't know Joe, so Joe Steve Baczek is, you know, one of the godfathers, if you will, right, of building science. And so you were able to learn firsthand under his wing.
Yeah, I tell people, you know, as an architect, that was my master's and PhD, is, you know, walking the halls daily with, you know, with Joe, but there's also all the supporting cast of Coda, Armin Rudd, Neil Moyer, John Straub, Gus Handegord, the Yost brothers, Betsy. You know, when you're hanging out with those people that are doing nothing but trying to push this large rock uphill, you're forced to learn something. You know, even if you were against it, you were still forced to learn. So it was certainly an exceptional experience for a young architect.
So why do you think it's been so difficult? I know we're taking a deviation here, but, you know, from a building science side, why has it been so difficult to get some of these understandings and methods, that a lot of which have been around for a long time, but we don't practice as contractors around the country?
I think, you know, for the first time in building history, we're asked to think harder than we ever have. And I also think that we don't have the right tools to pose the right answers that we had, say, 20 years. I mean, think about what we did 25 years ago. There was probably 2 wall assemblies on the market, right? You built 2x4, you put plywood, put tar paper on. And if you wanted to be real exceptional, you built the wall out of 2x6. And those were your 2 options. Think about what your options are nowadays. I mean, everything from a bale of hay to you know, some pretty exotic materials from Europe to, you know, wool insulation and all these things. So trying to understand and how to set up a set of priorities to ask the right questions to develop the right walls. And because we don't have that full understanding, it instills a lot of fear in designers and builders, because obviously builders like yourself, the minute you kind of switch gears, it imposes a certain level of risk that is uncomfortable, and nobody likes being uncomfortable.
That's a great point. What I've seen is in building, we kind of we're kind of in our own methods, if you will. So it's whatever's easy for us in a way that, our engineers and architects are taught a certain way. So they design, and structurally it's engineered a certain way. So we get stuck in these patterns, that we continue to do because it's difficult to make those changes. It's difficult to think outside the box and say, what other information's out there? How could we do advanced framing? How could we really change the structure to now optimize the envelope? And I see from just the engineer architect level, it's difficult to get them mentally there. It's difficult for us as builders to get our installers there and our labor force.
Yeah, I mean, trying to get you're asking 5 trains to get on different tracks all at the same time and be happy about it and feel like they're not at risk, which is a huge challenge. And even though we have people like Joe, who's been out there for the last 40 some odd years preaching this stuff, it's still a challenge to try and get up to speed. And you're trying to get that right list of, okay, I worry about this first, I worry about that second, and then I worry about this, and make appropriate decisions. It's a challenge. And the other thing is our building industry, it's like everything else in the world, it's become a lot smaller. I mean, 40 years ago, a builder in Boston had no idea what they were doing in Texas. Probably didn't care either. And now with Instagram and all these other things and lectures, people flying all over the country, going to conferences, you get a taste of, what they're building in Washington State and Oregon or Minnesota and North Dakota or Boston. And they're slightly different, even though they're the same climate zone. People get certain materials, certain places, and build a certain way. And then that, as a builder in Boston, you sit there and say, oh, should I be doing these details that they're doing out in the Northwest, and vice versa? So it becomes a challenge there too, because that just imposes more options. And we get fewer and fewer answers, but we probably get more options on the table daily than we do answers.
Now, that's good perspective. I have seen that there are more options, but at the same time, there's a lot more knowledge being shared. Influencers such as yourself are being, willing to teach and start build shows where, us builders can look at this and become educated and make sure that we're doing the most proper construction we can to build the best product that's going to be sustainable for our client. And so talk to us about that, Steve. I mean, one of the issues that most of us have as we're getting into this movement or in construction, at pre-construction, we're working with a traditional format of designing a house, and then we're trying to apply, building science techniques, whether it be green or sustainable. So how is that method? How should it start, or what are you doing different from the front end?
I think, for builders in general, one of my common kind of teaching principles is that if you build house number 2 the same way you built house number 1, you're failing yourself and you're failing the client, because there's something you should have learned when you built house number 1 that you should have then been able to apply to house number 2 as an improvement. Now, that could be a business improvement. It could be a building performance improvement. It could be something as simple as, let's add a couple more air leakage details and see if we can get where we were at 3 down to, or 5, or where we were at 5 down to 3. Well, let's see if we can get down to 2 or 2.5 now. But I think there should be this constant strive to get a little better. I mean, if you're a builder and you're going to be in business for 30 years, the house you build in year 30 should be just totally eclipsing the house you built in year 1, right? They should be different. Yeah. And you should push your manufacturers, every one of them. They're working hard. I talk to manufacturers all the time. And when they're coming to town, I have a couple of them. They call me, we go out to dinner, and it's just simply a chat. Hey, what's new? What's going on? The same with my insulator. He's local, but I probably have dinner with him every quarter. And it's certainly to say hi. He's a nice guy. We work well together, but more so is there anything new coming out? Or did you buy new machinery? Is there some other way that we can install rock wool or cellulose or whatever? Is there a cheaper way we should be doing this? But something, always upward pressure to try and make this better.
So based on your experience then, Steve, when you're looking at designing a home, are there certain aspects of the home you should be focused on? I mean, you brought up air leakage, right? So should we be looking at advanced framing techniques? Should we be looking at mechanical design? what are some key things that all architects, engineers, and builders should be aware of from the front end?
I think that, we should be aware of all, as many options that are available. Now, that doesn't mean we incorporate all those options, but I do think as a building professional, when a client comes to us to build a certain product and they say, okay, well, hey, what if I threw another 20 grand at this? What do we do then? As building professionals, we better have the answer, because if not, then we're failing them. So we should understand kind of what that ladder of performance is and what are the priorities. Certainly water is the number one killer of buildings. And people have heard me say, if it don't last, it don't matter. So you can build our whatever kind of wall you want, but if we're putting it in a dumpster because there's a failed window leak or water management system, then it really doesn't matter what the R value is or whatever certification you think you're striving for. The first certification should be leak free, and that's probably the most important thing. And I think the other thing for designers and engineers and such, and builders, is that we should really concentrate. I'm a big proponent of proportional design. And when I say proportional design, what I mean is I probably shouldn't be building an R40 wall and R80 roof and putting R3 windows in the wall, right? So I need to figure out, how do I bump up the windows or build a wall proportional to those selections? But I don't want to get kind of what you call it, unlevel on those decisions. I want them to be somewhat across the board. And the other thing is make a priority of the things I can't change, right? Air leakage and insulation, I can always come back in a lot of attics and throw a little more insulation in there in 2 years. I can't swap out the windows. And from a remodeling perspective here in New England, one of the big challenges is we have these houses with, 40, 50-year-old windows. And it's like, okay, we're going to do this addition, remodeling. Are we swapping out all the windows? Because that's usually a $30, $40, $50,000 price tag to get all the windows swapped out. And it's like, if we make those, and the sad thing is I can go down the street and see somebody putting in damn near the same window in a new house. And that's discouraging, because we're here fixing one, and then four doors down, they're putting in the same thing or pretty damn close to it. So.
Well, and part of that probably has to do with a little education too, is right, helping the customer, the end user, understand, because we do understand that everything's driven on budgets. So we have to be conscious of that for our client. But how can we wisely spend those dollars where, it's easy for our clients to get distracted maybe with a $30,000 oven, right? So, yeah. But, how do we help them see the value of a window package or architectural features that have overhangs to protect those windows, right, from heat?
Well, I think that, the first level of education is to ourselves, because we can't be the teachers that foster these great ideas to clients unless we get somewhat of a good handle. So I think it's our professional responsibility to kind of personally grow, and understand what some of these options are. And there's a lot of stuff out there. And, there's a lot of these companies that literally spend, millions of dollars on reps. I mean, when was the last time you had your rep come in and talk about windows and not talk about, hey, how cool, how big can we get? Can I get a 14-foot window? But really talk about what's the next level of performance. If I had a client that just wanted to go from the same windows we use there, Tommy, what would be the next suggestion for them, or set up a meeting with you to talk about what are those options? One of the funny things, Brett, is I get a lot of clients that come to me for energy efficient homes, certainly. But that doesn't mean they even understand what an energy efficient home is. They just know that there's that label out there. So when we get into talking about it, I've had people wanting passive houses, and I say, well, we'll go with triple glazed windows. And they're like, well, what's a triple glazed window? But this is a person that wants a passive house, but they clearly don't have the education to understand what the components are that they're really seeking. So that personal education is huge. And if you're an architect or builder and you just want business as usual, then I guess, we're not going to change that. But if you're looking for a market advantage, I think, being that guy that does something a little different is the one that a lot of people want.
That's super sound advice because, it's really easy as we're designing a home, and because of social media, our clients will see a steel window. I want that steel window look, or I want this thin profile. So we get obsessed on how does that architectural series work for the window and how's it look? Whereas we need to be educating ourselves with our window reps, not just styles, but performance, right? Like you mentioned, the 2, 3, 4 glazed windows, and what goes into that, what's our U value and how does that now incorporate with the house performance? Because then we can leverage the client and say, look, we understand we want this modern contemporary house. Well, here's our options, but let's keep in mind the glazing. And this is very important for a builder such as us in Phoenix, where it can get extremely warm in the summer and we need these buildings to perform, so we don't have a lot of leakage.
Yeah, it's funny that, people in the kind of southern building belt of the United States don't think, oh, well, we're not this cold climate. We don't need to do what they do up in Minnesota. And my comment to them always is do you pay for energy? Because if you do, you probably want to retain it as long as you possibly can to make it its highest value. So just because you live in the South doesn't mean, okay, we just pump air conditioning in and we can leave the doors open and let it run outside. It's you're paying for it. It's a cost, and there's a value in comfort and health, and again, it's even beyond just the heating and energy efficiency equation. It's the water management issue. It's durability issues. It's maintenance issues, right?
Yeah.
Someone that can afford a $5 million house, they want to play golf. They don't want to be there to meet the painter Saturday morning to fix their house.
Yeah, that is so true. And it's funny you bring that up because, the terminology we use is air conditioned space, right? Livable air conditioned space. And up in colder climates, they'll use heated space, so different terminology, but in essence, it's the same, value for energy.
It's the same thing. You're buying energy somewhere. Somebody's taking some type of fuel and they're turning it into energy that you're going to turn into cooling or heating somewhere in the country. So it doesn't really matter. The equation's still pretty much the same, that you want to convert the energy as inexpensively as possible, and then you want to hold on to it as long as you possibly can. And, that's the secret.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made the comment, you talked about one of the biggest enemies, which we all understand, is water water intrusion, because of all the issues we have with water. So throughout your years of experience in consulting and designing and visiting projects, what are some areas we should focus on as builders, architects, engineers, where you have typically seen water issues?
So, house style certainly plays a role, right? We've all seen the flat roof or parapeted building that has absolutely no overhangs. And then you put these nice big window holes in those walls and then ask everything not to leak. It's kind of like taking your fisherman's hat and then cutting the brim off of it and saying, okay, I need to keep water off my face. You can't do one without the other. So, I think a large portion of it starts with design. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be allowed to build houses with parapets and flat roofs and all of that, because I have. But I'll tell you, I get a few sleepless nights when I do those kinds of designs as opposed to the one that has the 30-inch roof overhang, because that one there, I sleep pretty darn comfortable, because the number one rule of water is get rid of it as fast as you can. And if I don't allow it to be a problem, then it can't be a problem. So, design is certainly, the first battle, but then working with all your manufacturers and having the knowledge of what's the proper installation for a window. And when I say what's the proper installation, I'm not saying how do I keep water out. It's more what's the proper installation should water get in, because Mother Nature really doesn't lose many battles. She's a pretty formidable opponent, and eventually she gets there. I see a lot of people on Instagram, they put all these posts up, oh, I use this tape, oh, I use this, whatever sealant. And my first question that I always tell them to ask is, the minute you think you're keeping water out of a system, the first question you should ask yourself is, what happens if water gets in? Because my time there at Building Science and doing building investigations, we never investigated a building that kept water out. right? We always investigated buildings that had water in that couldn't get out. And that was a huge problem. Or the water got in real easy. So you really need to pay attention that it's not so much about keeping water 100% out. It's just managing it and working with Mother Nature.
So how would that be applied? I mean, if we look at it for like a stucco, which we do a lot of here, it's really important that we have air gaps, right? Stucco is inherently going to suck in the water like concrete. And so if we have air channels separating where as that water does come in, we can drain that, and drain it through the walls, through the floor, through the weave screed before it gets to the house membrane or waterproofing. But in windows, are you recommending you have some sort of drainage, like a multi-slider in the bottom, a sill plate where everything can drain?
Yeah, I think there's some type of system that suggests that if water gets behind my primary weather barrier, how does water get back out? Because it will. So does that mean that we have pans under all of our doors? And up here, a lot of times I do slab on grade homes here, and we'll put a 2x4, 2x6, whatever the wall is. We'll drop one of those in the slab to give us this pan that's built into the slab, and then we'll build it out of that pan, meaning shim the door or fur it up. But that gives us that low spot where we have a place for water to go should it get into the system and then drain. We'll have an effective way to drain it out to the outside. But there's probably not any system I can think of on a wall that probably wouldn't work better with thin air space.
Yeah, that's great advice. I've seen now a lot of the exterior door, multi-sliders that we're working with out in Phoenix, because that's a big design element for our homes out here. And they are doing these, pans that go under the slider and then actually go underneath. We have drains underneath the floating floor, whether it be pavers or, tile that's applied to the patio. And so we're creating a gap. So that way, as water comes in, it can still drain under the tile and get out away from the house, especially in an area, as you mentioned, where you don't have a big overhang.
Right. And gravity's free energy, right?
It is.
Use it to your advantage.
Yeah, and our patios always slope away, which is what you want. And so that's what you're mentioning, on windows, if you have a windowsill, here our HOAs will dictate, okay, windows have to be set back 8 inches, on the front elevation, and certain sides 6 inches. So the good thing is it allows us to create some negative slope away from the window, when we get that driving monsoon rain.
Right. And I think it's really important that clients, part of that education process is clients need to understand that too, because they're obviously footing the bill, but there's a totally different cost than installing one of those multi-slide doors in a water managed system versus just having an opening in the framing, taping it off with some zip tape or whatever, and calling it a day. There's a different cost than that, but that cost is totally related to durability, maintenance, and longevity.
So how do you manage that as an architect when you have a client or builder come in and now you're trying to do two things? You're trying to design a home that's going to perform, but still incorporate beauty in that design. So how are you managing that? Because there are some things that maybe look great on a picture, but practicality and real life will have issues in the future. So how do you kind of manage that communication?
And it's a huge challenge because probably, 75% of the time I win, 25% of the time I don't win. Up here, we have a lot of people that the multi-slide and folding doors are slowly creeping into our region up here, but we also have those big double sliders that kind of meet in the middle. So you can get an 8-foot opening and they park on 2 side lights of equal length. And I've seen those a lot where after a year or two, you start accumulating a little pile of snow at that joint because it's 2 operable pieces of doors that are trying to give you this airtight, watertight closure. And it might work for a number of years, but I've seen a lot of them fail. And I'll have that conversation with homeowners saying, I would never put in that door. I think it's a bad idea, but if you want to put it in, I can't, I can only do so much. You ask me for my professional opinion, I give it to you. If you want to roll the dice, I don't know what to tell you, but I wouldn't do it.
So do you see a lot of that? Because I mean, you've seen in Phoenix, we have for most of the year, it's good weather. I mean, with the exception of drive-in rain in monsoon season, if we keep overhangs, we're pretty safe except for the heat. So we have these massive multi-sliders. And is it mostly due to weather, due to bugs? I mean, what's a big reason they're not doing them there in your part of the country?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that, it's the expanse and your how can I say this? Your duration of use is probably, 3 or 4 times ours. I mean, you could probably still open that door in December at Christmas time and have a party on the patio.
Yeah.
It would get pretty ugly here if we opened a multi-slide door in November or even October. So, so we don't have that luxury. So a lot of people look at it as, we can look at it as we can put in that 20-foot multi-slider and it's $30,000 or $40,000, whatever it is, or we can put in one patio door and put in a bunch of fixed side lights or glazing there to be one big window opening that you still can move in and out of it. You don't get the full opening, but it's an opening you're only going to use for 2-3 months out of the year. And even then, I don't know if you've ever been in New England in August at about 7 p.m. when the sun goes down, the mosquitoes carry you away.
Yeah.
So we just there's really not a good time. I don't know. Up here, I think they're more of a kind of token of something that's cool in my house than something that's a real practical application.
Well, that's good insight, because that was going to be my question is, so what's your alternative when you say, hey, I where you have a slider that opens, closes in the middle and then opens to either side, what's the alternative? But that is good. You could put like a French door or an open door on one side and then just have a bunch of fixed panels. So you still get that natural light, right? You still get that, that view. It's just now you're safeguarded from the elements.
And how that ties into performance is when I do a lot of work with European windows. So when you look at a European window, the cheapest one is the fixed window. I can buy a window that's, 13, 14 foot wide, 6 foot tall, that's triple glazed, big picture window, fixed unit for probably $2,500. That is just, incredibly cheap given the performance that it's getting. So if you understand that, then now I can go to the client and say, hey, we can give you a whole wall of glass here. You get one door that goes in and out. I get that. But the other 7 months out of the year, when the climate is really challenging, you got some of the best glazing in the world on your wall there, providing comfort and, health and durability throughout those winter months. So having that education is huge.
Well, and from a peace of mind, I mean, they're optimizing the views, but then from us, from a performance, if it's triple glazed, there's no water infiltration, right? Because it's a fixed window. You don't have to worry about something being operable.
Right.
That's where it gives a lot of peace of mind to us. I love fixed windows myself.
Yeah. It's amazing when you get into it. A lot of people, occasionally I get the one homeowner that wants a real, we want a real energy efficient house, passive house. And then they want to talk about making every window operable. And I was like, well, it's kind of contradictory to what you're doing. You're asking to build the healthiest, most, the best environment inside. And then you're going to open the windows and bring in pollen, bring in humidity, bring in either cool or heat or whatever. Chances are you're probably not opening these windows. So it's really to our benefit, because then you when you could take a window package and go to half of it as fixed windows, saves you a bunch of money, and you get a few more windows probably out of the deal too. So
that's great advice. So now let's move this a little bit to the air leakage comment you had made. So what are, we talked about how to protect from water. Now, what about air leakage? What are some techniques? Do you prefer rock wool? Do you prefer spray foam? And then how do we kind of seal that house from an air leakage standpoint?
Yeah, so I think you need to be able to identify clearly what your air barrier is. And when I say what it is, a lot of, when we're lecturing, Peter and I, people say, what's the best material for an air barrier? And I'll ask, well, where are you in the house? because it could be the slab, it could be zip wall on the outside, it could be the glass in the window. They're all effective air barriers. It's a matter of making the connections when the materials change. We do use a lot of spray foam up here in New England. There are some regions up here where they highly frown on its use. And, I have somewhat mixed emotions about it, because as an architect, I want to make the right environmental decisions. I want to do the right thing. But utmost, I want to build the right house with the right products that do the right job. And there are instances where spraying 2 inches of closed cell foam is the best option at hand. And with that being said, then I rely on working with my insulator to how can I assure them that we're getting the best, most environmentally friendly closed cell foam.
Right.
Now, I know people there, like I said, there's a lot of people that slam cell foam, but the reality is take a ride through Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. I mean, that I don't think there's any other insulation that's really being used down there. So
right.
it's not going away anytime soon. That's
right.
My bottom line. So what we really need to do is work with manufacturers and pressure them to get rid of the bad things, and work on how do they make these products, and then how do they get mixed at the job site? How do you ensure that we're getting the right product on the job site? And because it's a chemical, mixing right there on the job site with all these cell foams. They come in a barrel, and the gets mixed and sprayed into your wall.
And for those listening, what you're alluding to is the health side, right? The off-gassing and just the chemical composition as you're putting in closed cell or open cell, the fumes there over time, or maybe, as some have alluded to, with some of the lesser products that maybe could be a fire hazard. So you're just saying, make sure we're using the optimum product that's out there. And
right.
In my market, it's predominantly open cell foam.
Yeah. And I mean, I work really hard at trying to understand the right things to do. And there's probably going to be some people listening that are going to say, "Oh my God, I can't believe you just said that." But I know one gentleman that is pretty much the godfather of blown in or foam insulation. He's been doing it since probably like the mid 70s. And I've known him from my time at Building Science Corporation. And I caught up with him maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and at a conference, and we were just chatting, having a beer, and I simply asked him, I said, in all of your time, which is, we're talking 40-ish years plus years, have you ever seen a truly documented case where health was directly related to the foam installation? And he said no. He said he didn't know of one. He said there's been certain claims and stuff, but it's never been directly tied to it. And I asked the same thing of a couple of the insulators I work with. And I'm not saying that they're not bad, but it's real easy to go at the foam industry and say, "Oh my God, that stuff off gases, you want to make sure the baby doesn't go in that house for the first 2 years," or it's not like that. I've used it in a couple passive houses. I have one client that, they're a retirement couple, and he claims it's the best environment he's ever known when he goes inside his house. And they have spray foam in there. He's not dying of cancer. He's not, there's not bad things happening to him. It's actually the opposite. He's had some respiratory asthma and all this stuff, and it's cleared up by living in this passive house. So
that's really great insight, Steve. And I feel I've heard a lot of the same research, and there are conflicting opinions with everything. But what I like about you is that you're having reasonable conversations, doing your part of it in research, and then making sure there's applications that do fit and optimize that.
Yeah. And the latest craze is the carbon emissions craze. I get that too. And I'm totally sensitive to it. I'm not trying to say, "Hey, let's everybody just buy a 10-cylinder diesel and let's whoop it up and drive around," right? That's certainly not the key, but it's I liken it to, I love this analogy. I'll go to the grocery store and I'll see this woman in line and she's got, 20 bags because, oh my God, we can't use plastic bags, right? I have to be environmentally friendly. I have my cloth bags here. We'll use them. And as I follow her out into the parking lot, she loads them into a Suburban or a Tahoe. And I'm sitting there going, okay, what doesn't fit here, right? You can't claim to be one person and then you're out there being a different person. It's we need to tie it together. And the same with this carbon emissions. It's, the building industry certainly plays a role, but if everybody that owned a car drove it 10% less and ate, maybe 20% less meat and ensured that our electricity came from some type of renewable source, either site or generated by the municipality, that would be a huge, huge turnaround for what carbon emissions are doing. It's not just about the building. There's a whole lot of things in our lifestyle that we need to change. And I've always said that our culture is crisis oriented. We don't change.
It's true.
We don't change until there's a problem. So That's why I have my quad cab Chevy pickup. I tell people I'm taking it upon me to use up gas as fast as we possibly can, because we're not going to change until it's all gone, right?
Yeah. And sometimes that crisis seems to be screamed louder for other political views, so that can get a little messy. But going back to the air leakage, and that's great insight, Steve. So, we know the insulation can help. I mean, what are some other trouble areas in the house that we should be looking at to help seal, for a blower door test and to seal?
The thing about air sealing is that it's a very low hanging fruit. I mean, what you're really talking about is you're talking about a couple boxes of caulking or sealant or a box of tape, or, I'm sure you're aware of Aero Barrier. They're all over down there, and I have used them on a few projects, and I don't mind plugging for them. If you can afford it and get that into your budget, that's a hell of a way to finish off a construction build. The thing that I would warn you against is don't treat Aero Barrier as an alternative to good construction. Use it as a, addition to some good
to enhance
construction.
it.
Yeah.
So explain to our listeners what aerial barrier is for those that aren't familiar.
So basically what Aero Barrier is I forget the name of the material, but it's a material that goes airborne, and it basically finds all the little nooks and crannies in the building. And you want to do it, right after drywall or before you trim it. But basically when you have the building envelope intact, they can mask off all the windows and doors and such. But it's an aerosol that goes out and just starts filling up all the nooks and crannies. And the beauty of it is, and this is my crude understanding working with them the couple times that I've seen it done, is, if you have say an 1/8 inch crack, well, this stuff starts building up on the edges. So as it builds up, they're monitoring it with a blower door. So you can kind of pay as you go when you're doing it. So you can sit there and say, okay, I really want to get down to 2.0 or 1.0. Well, they crank up the blower door, they monitor it, and they set in the target, and they just keep blowing this stuff in the house, because it's going to latch onto the edge, and then the next level of aerosol is going to latch onto the previous level, and it's going to take that crevice and keep minimizing it until, if you wanted to run it all day, then it's full. But it doesn't have to be full. You can just close it off 70% of the way, and that might get you to 2.0 or whatever your target is. So it's the nice thing is it's this kind of dialed in approach, which is a huge benefit, because it's not an all or nothing proposition. It's kind of this is where I want to go.
So that's a great explanation for anyone listening. And so now, as you're thinking about air leakage and you're thinking about water leakage and all the design elements, I mean, what other main points would you recommend that we should address or consider when designing and building the home?
I mean, proportional thermal levels, we touched upon that a little earlier. And, when you're talking about control layers, basically what are the things that I want to control in my environment? Water being number one, air being number two, vapor is number three, and thermal is number four. So when I see people that are boasting about, oh yeah, I just built this really good house, I got R40 walls and an R70 roof, but they don't talk about how they're managing vapor or water, it really makes me a little afraid for them, because while it's great to talk about R values and boast about them, we have to make sure everything else gets right so that the R value actually has a long life, because that's the only time insulation really matters. To me, I tell people insulation is a financial equation, right? If I put in a bunch more, then I save a bunch of energy. If I put in a little, I buy a lot of energy. So it's a question of how much do I want to invest and where do I want to put it? Now, the most insulation that you can put on the outside is always going to be the best solution. When I was at Building Science, I always tell people this story. Gus, who was one of Joe's mentors, he came down there. We were sitting in there having lunch, and I was a young architect at the time, and just said, "Hey, Gus, I got you here all alone. Give me the secret sauce here for what's the best wall I can build. Like, what's the best way to insulate a wall and build it?" He said, "Put as much insulation on the outside of the wall as you can afford, and you'll never go wrong. Because it's always going to work for you out there."
So what would you recommend on the outside? I've seen, years ago when I was in college in Utah, actually, I remember there was a big home, and because it was a vaulted ceiling, T&G interior, what they did was they overbuilt the roof, right? And then they insulated the roof and then covered it in sheathing. And so all the insulation was done on the exterior, as you mentioned. So what are some methods, and products out there that we could use on the exterior to help kind of beef up that insulation?
Yeah, I mean, any of the rigid foams, there's environmental responsibilities that are kind of tuned to all the different rigid foams out there. There's EPS, which is expanded polystyrene. There's XPS, which is extruded polystyrene, and polyiso. So EPS usually gets the most favorable environmental rating, but it has the least R value of the bunch. You have XPS, which, at R5 per inch is a good material, widely used in Canada. I see a lot of Canadian Instagram posts that use XPS pretty much widespread, but they get kind of knocked for their manufacturing processes and bringing that foam to life. You have polyiso out there, which there's always the argument of what's the true R value on it. And, for me, it's like, does it really matter if I claim it to be 7.2 and it's 6.9? Mm-hmm. Is there really that much of a difference? Go ahead. I'll concede. I'll even give you a 6.8. You can even be better off with that. But it's a good one. And rock wool's out there, but mm-hmm. people talk about the processes for making rock wool, and that the carbon emissions thing. So now wool insulation is out there, but wool insulation, while it might be really good, it's not ready for prime time. It's not the cheapest thing on the market. It's not anywhere near it. So, can you get I have a hard time getting a client to buy into some really good water management. Trying to bring wool insulation to the table with them, it's a hell of a challenge, right? It's not one of the top 10 things I can bring to the table. I would love to, but the reality is I'm trying to figure out what's that best kind of set of modest decisions that gets me there, but gets me there successfully with the least harm to our environment. One of the things that I like to talk about is we have all these discussions about, oh my God, that's not really environmentally responsible. Oh, that's awful for the environment. But here's some shocking news to everybody out there in the building industry. The second we choose to build, we've become environmentally irresponsible, right? We're taking a set of resources from somewhere, we're accumulating them, we're forging them or making them into some product, and then we're trucking it out to a job site that people are driving their cars to put together to use a certain level of energy or an exorbitant amount of energy, depending on where you live and what kind of house you buy. And you use that energy for some kind of lifestyle. So there's nothing about that that's really environmentally responsible. It's just, what's the least harm we can do? We're going to do some level of harm. I don't think we can avoid that. Once you make that decision, it's just what's the least level of harm we can do.
That's an interesting perspective, because it is true. I mean, the reality is, if we're building a home, there's resources and costs to the environment, to build this home. So how can we manage that? And then to take it a step further, is your point, the reason we need to understand these topics more is because we want these homes to be sustainable and last the test of time, and not in 5 years or 10 years have to recycle and tear down this house and build a new one and use more resources, which is what you mentioned earlier when it comes to, you could build this great house, it's well insulated, but if there's water, you're tearing it down and redoing it.
Right. And if I have a house that's, say, carbon friendly, but it gets recycled in 30 years versus one that might be a little less carbon friendly, but it lasts 80 years or 100 years, in my eyes, they both are doing the same thing, or the latter might even be doing it better, right? Yeah, we had a little more initial harm, but the longevity plays a major role in what we're doing. That life cycle cost, if you will.
So what's your favorite style then, Steve? As you're working in architect, do you have a favorite style you've done over the years?
It's funny because it's not really an architecture style. My favorite style is the one with the good client, the happy client, right? I don't know if that's a style, but as I grow older, it's like getting the 7,000 square foot, $5 million house or whatever. I mean, put whatever number you want to it, but getting the big expensive house that has, kind of unlimited financial resources, it certainly might not be as fun as the one that you're doing for, say, $500,000 or $600,000 addition for a couple that's extremely happy. Or I've done like passive houses in the, say, $180 square foot range, and to know that this family just built their first house and are going to raise their two kids in a zero energy passive certified house that I designed for them, there's a lot of satisfaction. It goes a long way. So, I mean, it's cool to do big fancy stuff too, but I have a pretty eclectic mix, because I'll do everything from a 2-stall garage to a 7,000-8,000 square foot home, and they're all interesting to me. I just have this kind of willingness to just enjoy life and work with good people, be happy all the time, have fun. I'm a big guy playing with big boy Legos, right?
I love that you said that though, Steve. I mean, what's amazing about that, it's funny because on social media a lot of us portray the latest and greatest because it gets the most content, but where we're very similar, it's funny because I'll have clients ask and they're like, hey Brad, I want you to do our home, but this isn't a 20,000 square foot monster. And for me, it's the same thing. I always tell my people, I don't care if you're spending 100,000 or $1 million, and I don't care if the house is 2,000 square feet or 20,000. It doesn't matter. I just want to work for good people, because it's too stressful of an industry and it's too difficult to work with difficult people. It just is.
Well, and for the younger people listening out there, the reality is think about the financial resources of the person that builds the $10 million, 6,000 square foot home, right? A small leak can become a major problem for you and the builder. Yep. Whereas the homeowner that's, doing that renovation for 400,000, they're more likely to, work with you should things happen.
That's very sound advice. And it's not that you want to stay out of issues, because we all want to build these great homes, but sometimes issues do come up. And what's your exposure, right? And who's the client on the other side? And how's that relationship going to play into the warranty or to, right, if things get a little hairy
just play
there.
Games. I have a builder that's a really good friend of mine that he built a house, the framer, it caused some problems for him. And then at the end of the project, he sent the, homeowner a bunch of extras, all this money that was due. And the homeowner said, well, it's funny because, not only do I not owe you that 150,000, but I'm going to sue you for 150,000 because that's what I think you owe me now. And they had the luxury of playing games. So, the small builder, the lumberyard's sending him the bill month after month saying, hey, you owe us 60 grand. Hey, you owe us 70 grand or whatever that is. And the homeowner in his multi-million dollar house is just sitting there telling the lawyer, hey, defer our meeting another month or two. Let's stretch this out. My wife had a really tough month. Let's see if we can push this out a month. And they can play games like that. And it becomes a really big challenge for somebody trying to do the right thing,
It's so interesting. I think we could spend a whole nother conversation topic about how to vet clients and do the best to see that, because as you mentioned, if you're young building your company, sometimes you're so excited about getting the job, you're not looking at the history of the client or their background, or again, all these little things that play into it at the end of the day, we're for final payment, which I think all of us have been on that angle at some point.
Yeah, I have a really good friend builder. We chat all the time, but he was just telling me a story where he had some clients. You talked about vetting clients, and he had some clients call him, and he's trying to set up a meeting and this and that. And then the wife says, the husband can't make it. He goes, okay, well, we need to reschedule. And she's like, oh, I really don't want to reschedule. And he says, well, I don't want to have a meeting without the two of you there. And she kind of, took a little offense to that. And he just basically said, well, I don't think I'm the right builder for you. I wish you good luck, but I'm moving on. If you guys can't make the time to meet me for an initial meeting, where are we going to be 7 months down the road with a small conflict, right? Yep. It's so you have to see that, and it is tough. And he confessed. He said it was really tough telling them to go away. But I've also had another builder that's been in the business 35 years that I highly respect, and I often hear him tell people, if I paid those people $1,000, or if I paid those handful of clients $1,000 to go away, I would have made more money.
Oh, isn't that the truth? And it's funny. It takes a while to learn. You only know what you know. And a similar experience, I had been, learned, over the years of doing business development for our company. And then eventually, I was on a call. This wasn't too long ago. And it's a conference call. The husband and wife are on the call with me because the husband was traveling. And he just starts screaming at his wife. And I'm sitting there thinking, if he's going to scream at his wife like that with me on the phone, where am I going to be in 3 months from now with him? And he was a lawyer. So I ended up backing out, walking away. You just learn enough to know where the red flags are and say, hey, this isn't for me. Let's move on and we'll go fight another battle somewhere else.
Yeah, it's hard, but man, you have to, we always have, it's human nature to have the will to believe that we can make other people change.
Yeah.
But you can't. And, so you have to take those flags for what they're worth, and you have to stand up and be confident in that decision and move on.
Yeah. And most psychologists will say, even if you want to change, if you have a desire to change, it's still hard to change. Right. So no, that's great sound advice, Steve. So just a few more questions, to be sensitive to your time, so what's exciting you about now? Because I know you're involved with the Build Network, the Build Show, and very active in social media. So what are some things you're doing with the Build Show and with social media that's really helped your brand?
I think it's really exciting times right now because one, we have all these different methods of building. The world is certainly getting smaller. The Build Show network has totally increased my network and understanding. I was talking last night to the Norwegian carpenter on Instagram and just kind of chatting. So here it is, it's 11 o'clock and I was uploading some files, and we're carrying on a conversation about building with a guy in Norway. It's I don't know, it's pretty exciting stuff. And he found me on Instagram and we chatted, and he puts up cool stuff, and we have a little bit of learning, and hopefully someday our paths will cross. But Matt's been doing a lot of good things for a long time. I part of me gets discouraged when I put up a video or he puts up a video that him and I have done together, and the first 10 comments are, well, how much did that cost a square foot? Oh my God, you guys are criminals for building that way. You have to understand that Matt is, in my eyes, Matt's taking it upon himself to place himself in this leadership role. So are some of the things he does exotic? Yeah. Are some of the things that he does probably not ready for prime time, sustainable commodity assemblies? Yeah, probably not. But what he's trying to show you is that what you're doing might be wrong for these reasons, and this is the right way to do it. But we as professionals now, we have to go through and sort it out and figure out how do we take those good concepts that he's portraying there and make them fit into what we're doing. And I think the whole social media, if you're using it to your advantage, that's what you're trying to do. And it's aesthetically and performance, right? You can go through Instagram and follow all the interior designers and say, oh my God, look at that range hood. Oh my God, look at that 6-foot range. Look at that tile pattern. All that's great. But you can also follow those guys of, hey, that's an awesome air sealing detail. That wouldn't be hard to incorporate. I just get Johnny to do this instead of what we normally do. And there you go. You've upped your game. So it's the world is certainly getting smaller. You need to pay attention. You know?
I love that. And it is so true because there is so much information. And now, grateful for, architects such as yourself and Matt. He's doing some amazing things where it's easy for us now to have this constant resource. And because one of the things that's difficult is, I know you've shared on your podcast, is you talked about how, a lot of these suppliers will come in and they have their own statistics and their own research. A lot of them aren't sure where it's from, as they're sharing their products. And so it's good to have another opinion, that understands building science and technology and, what is true information that we can now apply and techniques that will help us be better builders? Because I think that's the hardest thing is for us to decipher. We only know what the sales rep is telling us, right?
Right. So we need to have that kind of third-party verification somehow, some way. Do we know experienced builders that, we can get into a building group? I mean, look at the grassroots movement that Michael Maines out of Maine started with his BS and beer. I mean, those things are popping up all over the country, DC, Chattanooga, Kansas City, Springfield, Missouri, Chicago, out in the Northwest. But, and there's other like-minded, we have one in Vermont called the SEON Group, which is Sustainable Energy Outreach Network or something like that. But it's basically, 20, 30 people get together the first Tuesday of every month and they talk about some aspect of building. And the rule is you check your business at the door. So you walk in, the people in that room are not your competitors. The people in that room are your friends. And you have to understand that. And it took me a while to understand that. And I think one of the biggest benefits of social media for me is it's somewhat selfish, but it provides the opportunity for a mind dump, right? I can't move on into the next level of stuff that I want to do until I can get rid of all the ideas that I have. So if I dump something on social media and say, hey, here's a house where we did a concrete-less slab on grade system, then that forces me now to take what's the next thing you're going to do, because you can't stop there. So holding on to that information is not necessarily a good thing. It goes back to that I should never build house 2 the way I built house 1. Yep. So it forces me to get to that next level stuff. So like I said, I use Instagram and LinkedIn and stuff as kind of a mind dump. It's like, yeah, I did that. Let me move on now. Let me find out and seek out how do I improve that and where do I go from there? So.
And whether that's helpful to us, I mean, if you're trying to experience all this on yourself, trial and error, it's a lot easier to learn from other people's mistakes or other people's understanding, right? It just accelerates that growth.
Yeah, Peter, my partner in speaking, Peter Yost, one of his favorite quotes is none of us will live nearly long enough to make all the mistakes ourselves, right?
Right.
So we have to share in them. And there are a lot of people on Instagram that it's like they put stuff on. And one guy, I don't know if you saw it, the one guy that just was driving in the Bobcat and he was trying to compact the dirt too close to the foundation wall. And he basically blew out the foundation, the concrete block foundation wall, and rolled the Bobcat right on its side. But he's like, I knew I was too close. And I don't know. It was funny. Anyways.
Yeah, it's funny. And it's like, oh, yeah. Hopefully we learn from that, right?
Do all the work. But yeah, we need to learn from each other's mistakes. So it's like we have to stop being afraid and don't be afraid to make a mistake. Obviously, we don't want to, make a huge mistake where we have to rebuild the house. But But we need to always be pressing forward in a very educated fashion.
Well, that's great. So with this then, Steve, what are you excited about next? Any big projects or anything upcoming?
So yeah, so we have a bunch of projects and a couple projects that I'm really excited about. I'm doing one with Jake that we're putting the whole house on concrete piers, but it has some cantilevered stuff to it, which is pretty exciting stuff that, I sent it to the engineer with a bunch of parameters that I would say were just short of a dream. And he came back and said, yeah, we can probably pretty much make all of that work. So that made me extremely happy. But what I'm really excited about is that we have plans in the next year or so where I'm going to have the ability to take all of this information and knit it into kind of an educational fashion to share it with people. So hopefully the industry, turns out to be we're in a better place in a year or two because of it. So I'm really excited about that we're taking these couple projects really public and making that information available. And it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun.
And we're super grateful for, industry leaders such as yourself that are willing to share that experience and knowledge and take time out of your day. And so for those listening, how can they find you? Your social media handles, website?
Yeah, so I have a website, stevenbaczekarchitect.com. I also am on Instagram at Steven Baczek Architect. I try and keep it pretty much the same brand. I have a couple friends where we have the Unbuild It podcast, where Peter Yost, Jake Bruton, and myself, we talk about building science concepts, and we call it the Unbuild It because we take building assemblies and building science concepts and break them down to common denominators, and you get the architect, the building scientist, and the builder's viewpoint. So occasionally we're in conflict with each other, but a lot of times we're in alignment, but we all have different sets of filters in how we move that information through our own personal systems. So there's a benefit to all there, whether you're an architect and trying to understand how a builder thinks or how other architects think. It's pretty cool, I think.
Well, thank you. I'll make sure we get those tagged, your podcast, website, Instagram handle, and anything on social media. But thanks again, Steve, for sharing all that knowledge with us today. Really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you very much, man. I greatly appreciate the opportunity here to join you today.